Well, Spooky and Hulda Clark against the enrolled Rife against the common cold. You know, I was kind of surprised I actually caught a cold, and I was like, damn, man, I can't believe it. You know, all the herbs I take and all the vitamin C and, I don't know, astragalus root, I still got a cold because it was actually picked it up from work, you know, like in the office, people, you know, somebody had a cold and I got it. Got over it pretty quick, though, and probably just a teeny little bit left. But you know what I did? I just want to pass on because I also want to explain a couple things about these frequencies they use in the Spooky. And I'll show you what the heck I'm talking about after the video with the camera and point down at the screen. But I'm using the Spooky Rife system, or quote-unquote Rife system, whatever you want to call it. And I was using the remote setup, and for people who are familiar with that. And I originally started to use cold and flu, proven frequency set. Then I tried the consolidated annotated frequency list set, and it didn't do nothing. And, you know, maybe I just got over it, too. Maybe that's the other thing, too, right? So I don't really know. It's not very scientific. But as soon as I started running Hulda Clark's influenza, A and B, and influenza Rife, strictly at 50% duty cycle, 100% positive offset, no complicated settings. It seemed to be abating quite a bit, and then it went away. So, but she's like, actually, I want to tell you this. You see, there's a lot of confusion on these frequencies. They're saying, why is there so many different frequencies out there? You got Rife frequencies. I'm not sure what the Hulda Clark frequencies are, but I do know that the ones on a consolidated frequency list, consolidated annotated frequency list, or the bio list, and usually it's a Vega list or whatever other list, they're usually coming from, a lot of the common ones really came from John Crane, which is Royal Rife's assistant. He actually derived these frequencies from the original Rife frequencies. And he worked with Royal Rife on this too, from my own readings and trying to delve into this. But you know what they did? Like, in other words, they'll put down, you know, this frequency, that frequency, and they'll have like a list. And Royal Rife usually just had one frequency or a short range. You know, one or two frequencies or a short range or one frequency. But you look at the consolidated annotated frequency list, you'll see a list. Now, if they're John Crane original frequencies from John Crane, what they did is they took an original Rife frequency and they divided it by a whole number. Then they rounded it out to the nearest integer. So a lot of times you'll see a very common frequency like 727 or 728. That actually came from an original Rife frequency of a much higher frequency, but actually 727.5 is better. That's a typical, and a typical anti-cancer frequency is 2008, but actually 2007.5 would be a little bit closer. It's a multiple, and they don't actually use like even numbers or odd integers. They were just dividing it up in by different numbers and putting out a list there. Say, just use this set, and it's actually off a Rife frequency. That's how some of the early ones came about when they were using the contact type pad type Rife machines. That's where these frequencies came about, a lot of them originally. Now, I know they got added to the list later, but some of the lists, some of the frequencies are a lot more proven than other ones. But it's best if you can actually have the original Rife frequency to use that puppy versus the lower ones, because they are, when they're divided down, they round them out to an integer. And you got to actually hit the higher frequency with harmonics. And that is why a lot of times when people run a consolidated annotated frequency list, a 50% duty cycle might not work, because what that does is it hits even or odd harmonics. It hits like divisor of 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. You want to run a different duty cycle like 78%, maybe 93%, 88%, or whatever. You know, there's different opinions on this. But I use a 78% because it hits odd and even harmonics pretty good. And if John Crane decided to divide the Royal Rife frequency by, I don't know, 132. If I used 50% duty cycle, I would not hit the original Rife frequency. That's why you don't want to actually use a 50% duty cycle with the consolidated annotated frequency list. And you can see I still got a little bit of a tickle down there. It kind of bugs me, man. So, but anyway, the thing is, it's almost gone. It's like an itch, but I talk. That's what happens. But anyway, the thing is, yeah, pretty much it knocked it out. It's almost gone now. But the thing is, I found that when I started running, I mean, maybe it's not exactly, maybe it's just it happened that way. My immune system did it on its own. I don't know. But when I used the original Hulda Clark and Rife frequencies just on 50% duty cycle, I used influenza on a common cold, and it seemed to really knock it down a lot faster. That's my experience. I was running, proven list, the consolidated annotated frequency list. Didn't seem like it was doing nothing till I started running the other ones. That's just my experience. But I did try using different duty cycles and stuff. Now the thing is, with the common cold is like a symptoms of something, but it could be from so many different types of bacteria or virus. That's the other problem. You don't know what the hell it's from. You don't really know what it's from. But, that goes to show you there's limits on this technology, because you got to know exactly what bug you're dealing with to make it work. That's the other thing, assuming you got the right frequencies. But I just want to say that right now, I know the problem is with the right frequencies, there's such a short list on them. But right now, I'm actually leaning towards using a lot more of the Hulda Clark frequencies, because even though a lot of people can't exactly work that spectrometer thing she used to determine the resonant frequency of a microbe, I think she did do a lot of documented work to show that the frequencies that she lists, I'm not talking about her zapper, with simple zapper 30,000 hertz. I'm talking about the exact frequencies she lists for all these pathogens, or that short range. When you use those things, I think they work pretty good. And that was the one I turned on to work against the common cold, and it seemed to work very, very well. So anyway, I just wanted to pass this on because I don't think that a lot of the divided down original Rife frequencies work as well as the original ones. The problem is we don't know what the original ones are. But I'm also being able to suspect that if I can get a list of all the Crane frequencies that he used on the pad type Rife machines, whatever, I think if you take the lowest one, you make it like 1. You just say, you divide it by itself. You say 1, and you find out what other ones are multiples of that. If it's 2.5 times or whatever, or 3 times, or 8 3/4 times, you will probably be able to figure out what the higher common denominator is on, piecemeal of those lists. And I've been kind of looking into some of that stuff, and I says, I know there's other people who must have looked at this before, but I tend to think there's a lot more information out there, and I think other people have figured out other Rife frequencies and are keeping them to themselves. That's another thing. Because the whole way this thing got messed up, in the beginning, Rife did the right work. He was like, hey, this is what we do, and blah, blah, blah. And then you had Philip Hoyland come out, and he's hiding the frequencies in his side bands. Then you had John Crane come out, and he made it simpler with which I thought was great. He was using he made the contact type machine, so probably be more acceptable to the medical establishment, and you didn't have to worry about the FCC with the communications on the radio waves. So he was doing that. But then, instead of saying, well, let's just take the frequencies and divide them by, 10 and 20 and 15, and let's use simple multiples and keep it consistent and make a list. No, they had to make it where they were dividing the Rife frequencies by like different whole numbers and coming up with a list. So when you ran this stuff, you would, on that list, you'd be hitting the Rife frequencies at higher harmonics in different ways, but not exactly. Now I was like, man, this is bullshit. Because the way I'm looking at it, all these guys, because they know what they did, what the problem is? They could not make it their own work where they can just have only, just them be the source of the information. In other words, if that information got released, it would be in the public realm and it would screw up their niche market. So a lot of times, like, good example is like 727 is a very common Rife frequency, so is 728. Actually, 727.5 is a better one. It's actually, when you divide up, because they round it out to the nearest number. So when you hit the harmonics on, even if you hit the right harmonics on these lower frequencies, and you hit the harmonics and move it up and up and up, it does not hit it exactly like whatever Rife put out originally. Like 2008, which is a Cancer frequency supposedly, 2007.5 would be more accurate. So, I'm almost like, what I'm thinking is, I know Hulda Clark did a lot of work on her own. She came up with different numbers, but that doesn't mean they're wrong numbers. And she backed them up with a lot of scientific, or a lot of her paper, and test over and over again. I have a tendency just to use her stuff, and when I used it against the common cold, her stuff seemed to work really good. I was like, I'm running her stuff for like an hour straight, and on remote. And I just keep repeating it, and I got Rife going in between her in a 6-minute cycle, But I got Hulda Clark's frequencies, the one that's really knocking the stuff out. It really worked. I think it did. I'm not 110% sure. But in the future, if I see a Hulda Clark frequency, I'm going to actually use that one on a remote more than anything else, because I'm realizing that unless in the case of like the consolidated frequency list, I'm not going to use a 50% duty cycle. I'm going to use a higher duty cycle, so maybe 78%, an 88%, a 90%, or a 93% duty cycle. So it hits all the odd and even harmonics higher up. Because like I said, what Crane did, he took original Rife frequencies and he divided them by numbers, and he rounded off whatever result was and said that's the frequency. But it could be an even number he divided by, or an odd number. And if you use a 50% duty cycle, you're only going to hit the odd numbers, not the even numbers. That's probably why some of these other duty cycles, other than 50%, work better on a consolidated annotated frequency list. But if you're just using Hulda Clark or Royal Rife frequencies, right, and you have the right microbe that you designated that you got to get rid of, you just got to do a 50% duty cycle and 100% positive offset and go to town, and it knocks it right out. Now, as you noticed, I had a slight little tickle in my throat there, and I was talking. I was like, I couldn't talk. But my cold is basically gone. I feel better. My energy's back up again and all this other stuff. So, it worked. I got better for some reason. I'm not sure if this is the reason it worked, but it seemed like as soon as I turned on I was trying different things. As soon as I turned on the Hulda Clark one, that one worked. So I got a little lengthy on this explanation because that consolidated annotated frequency list is confusing. How come you got so many frequencies for one thing? Like I said, they were trying to hide their work, man. All of them, man. They all were. I mean, probably except Royal Rife himself. But then nobody had, he had to go hiding in Mexico because the boogeyman was after him because he was doing such a good job. They're going to tell you, right? But the other side of it is, I think I started messing around with some spreadsheets, and I was just looking at some stuff, and I says, I wonder if you could take, look at some of these lists. They say for this condition, mold and fungus or something, and I was just picking one out of the hat, and I says, well, let's use multiples and see which ones where you can get a higher number that divides into several of those frequencies. It takes some time, but I think we could probably find out some more Rife frequencies, and I think I'm going to say this again, I think other people have figured out what some other Royal Rife frequencies are that are not listed on the internet by looking at the crane frequencies and then multiplying them up and seeing what number it comes up to, where you have a good common denominator number that you could divide by a whole integer that would come up with that list, different whole integers that would come up with that list. I think there's people that have actually figured out other Rife frequencies, and they're not telling people. That's what I think 99% of the problem is with this research. Nobody shares. It reminds me to deal with, on another subject, I deal with Stanley Myers in the hydrogen, the secret of splitting hydrogen from water, hydrogen and oxygen from water into its basic elements with low amounts of energy with a special frequency. I can give a damn about all the other fancy stuff. Just what frequency was it, damn it? What'd you do? What did you pulse it with to get it going? What bolt did you do? What did you do? Everybody wants to get rich, man. They want to freaking, everybody wants to be famous and rich. So they do this stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, anything I figure out, I'm going to go in baby steps on every damn thing, but I'm going to tell you right now for this video, you might be better off, if you're using a consolidated frequency list, you're better off using like a 78% duty cycle, maybe 88, a 90, or 93, something like that. I'm not saying it's one or the other, but not a 50%, because you want to hit odd and even harmonics, because John Crane, when he came up with a lot of those numbers, his numbers for the pad type Rife machine, he took original Rife frequencies and he divided them by a whole integer. So he would take, say, I don't know, whatever, say like it was 300,000. He would divide one by 132. He'd say that's the number, and he'd divide another one by 526. So that's the other number. He'd divide one by 716. That's the other number. And those numbers would round it off. The resultant numbers would round it off. So if you're trying to hit the harmonics of the higher Rife frequency, you got to be using a duty cycle that hits both even and odd harmonics. Now, in the case of original Rife frequencies, or let's just keep it simple with Hulda Clark frequencies, because I think she's more, she's closer to this time. She died in 2007. She did, a lot of extensive work determining what frequencies worked on various microbes. Just used the simple 100% positive offsets, like she said, 50% duty cycle. And her frequencies are usually up there. They're like from like 70,000 to like 400,000 or something like that. They're up there. She actually has the right frequency or right exact range. So if you designate, hey, I got this microbe, and it's like, a doctor tells you, hey, I got that microbe, you might want to try that puppy along with your standard medical treatment, and it might help a great deal. So, right now, I'm a big advocate of the Hulda Clark frequencies, because I'm realizing why the consolidated frequency, annotated frequency list is so confusing. But I just want to put this as a caveat at the end. There are some frequencies on that consolidated annotated frequency list that are pretty much used in every section, and there are like 20 is one of them. And 464 is 465, right in that range. You could do 464 and a half. 727, 728, or 727 and a half, split the difference. 800, 880, and even 10,000. Oftenly used in almost all Rife type, pad type Rife sessions. So some of those are very legit, and not everything's legit. Not everything works all the time. And that's partly because the diagnosis is being done by an individual that's not a doctor and probably doesn't even have the right microbe they're trying to address, they're guessing. So it actually does, even this type of energy medicine does require medical professionals. Unfortunately, right now, the medical professional world is kind of like, we ain't using this stuff right now, Anyway, so I figured I'd pass on this tip. The tip is basically, if you're going to use a consolidated frequency list, try, I personally use a 78% duty cycle. Some people use 80%, 88%, 93%. I use the 78%. It's got odd and even harmonics. But now, I have become convinced, when I tried this on a common cold, I've become convinced that to use the Hulda Clark frequencies and just use 100% positive offset and 50% duty cycle. And I'll show you what I'm talking about on this machine right after this. And so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's my Spooky2 generator and 2 remotes. I have them taped up so they don't go nowhere. Nothing moves anywhere. They're like just masking tape across the whole thing with my DNA in there. And here I have the program being run for, I got Hulda Clark. You can see that right here. Hulda Clark and Rife for influenza on the common cold. And it works very well. It's worked very well. I just have a little bit of a tickle left in my throat, kind of like, from leftover residue from whatever the hell it was. 100% positive offset and 50% duty cycle. But if I was going to use, I don't know. If I was going to use this proven list, say for instance, it's a good list. I would not use a 50% duty cycle. I would use a 78% in my case. Some people use 88%, 90%, 93%, but you want something that gives you odd and even harmonics because these frequencies were actually derived from a Royal Rife frequency, and they used a whole integer to divide it by that Royal Rife frequency to come up with these numbers. And what they did was they used odd and even integers to come up with these numbers. So if you use a 50% duty cycle, you're only going to be hitting the right frequency on the list that works for the when they divided it by an odd number. That's why some of these freaking Rife, that's why some of these frequencies don't work. Because the duty cycle really shouldn't be 50%. It's going to have to be something else. And in some cases, it's not always, it gets more complex than that. It actually gets more complex than that. Because it depends on what harmonic it actually has to hit that original Rife frequency at. So sometimes you might use a 71% frequency. Duty cycle, I meant to say duty cycle, sometimes you'll use a 78. Sometimes you'll use an 88. Sometimes you'll use a 90. Sometimes you'll use a 93. And these people are keeping this stuff secret, man. That's what's screwed up. But if we had all the original Rife frequencies, man, and I think there's people that have calculated them and they're not sharing. That's my freaking opinion. We can go to town. But to tell you the truth, just by using Hulda Clark's frequencies, like say clear search here, Hulda Clark, she's got plenty. She got a pretty damn extensive list. This lady actually knew some stuff. I mean, this goes far beyond her zapper, If you could just put these things down, and you just want to run positive offset and 50% duty cycle. I don't know, amplitude, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, That's not super important. It doesn't have to be that high for remote work. But if you have the right diagnoses, this Hulda Clark list would probably be the safer list to use. Even though it looks different, I think she proved it pretty damn well. Anyway, so hopefully I made this clear as mud, and just want to pass on a couple tips because that's clearing up. It has cleared up some things for me. Why the hell is this damn thing so different everywhere? And they're doing it by design, man. People have been worked on this stuff before. Didn't want to give out their secrets. That's why they did this. So the duty cycle matters too. Anyway, over and out.